Welcome to Flâneurs. So this week, as I am joined by my buddies Matt and Dan, it's a topic near and dear to me that I wanted to talk about, which was around the culture of fail fast. So we've heard that moniker used around quite a bit, and in a lot of organizations that we work in, and especially prevalent in digital native organizations and some of our favorite unicorns who are clearly, obviously, always celebrated for creating the products, some of the greatest products that we love through this culture that they've been able to adopt. But this culture is also less prevalent and has a tougher time taking on being adopted in some of our, more traditional, older structures, if you will, in organizations. And so, I thought it'd be interesting for us to have a chat about, is that why is that so, and how, how is learning potentially seen as a tangible return on investment, by adopting this fail fast culture? Is that something that's visible? And why is the intangible return of learning something that's not as visible as it should be, in some of these other spaces. So I'll kick it to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. So we should probably qualify or explain what we mean by unicorn, shouldn't we? I would have thought.
Right.
So like my understanding of a unicorn would be an organization that did its initial public offering. It sold its first set of shares and it came in at a value over $1 billion, I would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
So
first set of public shares.
Public shares, yes, sorry, yeah. Initial public offering, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be like, I suppose, which ones have you got in mind for that? Is it like the usual Facebooks, LinkedIn's, I suppose, not Uber, yeah, things like that.
I don't know if Spotify would do as one. Yeah, I think most of our GAFA, and then you've got obviously, yeah.
And we view those organizations as people, as organizations that learn and that have, suppose, like from your question, they see learning as having a tangible return, and we think maybe other organizations see that less. That what we're getting into.
Yeah, I think it's about, obviously I bring a group of people together. I have this idea. I have a problem that I want to solve by creating a product or a service that responds to that need for potential customers, and obviously on that critical path, how do I go about getting to that, unicorn status, or generating that profit that I'm looking for, or whatever my mission and vision is, is learning that principle that I believe in, that I learn as much as I can along the way to solve that problem? Or is it that I, like some of these older structures where it's less prevalent, there's kind of a little bit more tunnel vision around how I want to go about that. And I need to be sure because I have so much at stake, which ends up being maybe, part of that sort of impeding, all those impeding ingredients that stop, that discount their learning. And so which conflict with learning, failing fast or learning fast. Right. So,
yeah, I suppose there's a big consideration of risk, isn't there? And what people feel is risky, and what innovating is, I suppose, or inventing. That a lot, it feels like there's a lot of organizations, and this might take us off another tangent actually, so apologies for this if it does, but it feels like a lot of organizations, even when they're talking about training, feel like if they allow their people to get new knowledge, they'll leave. They'll just wander off with this new knowledge and I don't know, profit themselves elsewhere. And I wonder like how much of a link that also has to the fact that then in their everyday work, there is a reticence to let people try stuff out, and try, I don't know, try putting things live, that they don't know. We don't know what will happen to it, because we don't know we don't know the results of anything that we put live, and a lot of, I think how we view a lot of traditional organizations is that they have this false sense of, like this deterministic approach. They have this false sense of certainty that everything they do and plan for will go according to plan, and then there's very little tolerance for the failure, for the learning. So like they'll tell people on two levels. They'll tell people this can't go wrong, whatever product you're building or whatever service you're pulling together. And then also those people have this sense of like, no, we're not going to pay for training because you'll just bugger off, as they'd say on in my country. So yeah, there's
We need to bleep that.
Go for it, Dan.
No, I said, do we need to bleep? It was a joke. Do we need to bleep that? Do I need to bleep bugger off?
Don't bleep that.
No,
It's not that bad over here. I'm pretty sure everyone will be okay with that.
yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Blush.
At least that'll be
Thank you for keeping me good.
one learned word. What about you, Dan? What's your kind of feeling on that?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting to me is that the companies, it's sort of paradoxical. The companies that can least afford to fail are the ones that fail fast, because those are the startups. It's like a failure could put them out of business. You take a big company, like I won't mention the name. People who know me know the bank I work. Well, it's sort of a bank. It's a financial company. I'll say it that way, that I worked for. Giant company. And there's sort of this running gag of, we could all not show up and the company would still print billions of dollars in profit every year, because every time someone swipes the card, they're getting a percentage, and those cards are in the hands of people, and it doesn't matter what you do. Those people are out there shopping. That company is going to just print money. So they could they have the ability to fail, because in fact, they do it all the time. They just don't really understand they're doing it. Because if they completely hose something, the company is going to exist tomorrow. So they actually have the luxury of being able to fail, but failure is a no word. Like this concept of failing fast is like, no, but we've been successful. We're a successful company. And so we talk about our successes, not our failures. Whereas a small startup, like if you fail, that's the end. Like it could be the end of the company. So it is sort of a paradox that the companies that can least afford a big failure are the ones that espouse this notion of failing fast.
But that's really interesting, because like we know there were those stories about mammoth organizations, the likes of, and I'll throw them out, like the Blockbusters and the Nokias, where just entropy set in, and they just started to rest on their laurels and not learn fast enough. And then so of those startups, the ones of those startups maybe that do become unicorns eventually and knock these massive companies off their perch, are the ones that learned so quickly, and they learned so much that they caught up, overtook, and put these mammoth big organizations to the sword. So that's quite a violent image there. I apologize for that. But but basically just showed them up, embarrassed them. And then they did go pop, didn't they? They did. So when you say like can't possibly go wrong, or or don't need to fail fast, they had an existential failure. And that does happen.
Yeah. I mean, what I've noticed, that's what I found interesting, and just to link back to, what you guys just mentioned about the fact that, how, the sort of presence of, this sort of culture in organizations who have an existential threat. So what I've noticed a lot, and this is one of my most recent clients, is that they were trying to make visible the burning platform, right, in the storytelling, to, the sort of employees, this is our burning platform, in the next 3-4 years. So this is what we need to go pursue in order to keep, stay afloat and keep and hopefully win, right? And so sometimes that burning platform can be innovation. It can be staying alive. It can be, profit driven from, our relationship with investors. And so I feel like sometimes the nature of that burning platform that is that ultimate call to action, sometimes determines, how failure is adopted, accepted. I think that there's a quote that always says, innovate, need is the mother of innovation, something like that. Right. Yeah. Invention. Right. So how do you making that need or burning platform, whatever, very visible so that people can buy into it and allow for, those ingredients necessary to innovate, to try, to learn, et cetera. I think oftentimes that there's a lot of difficulty in that. So
yeah, it's interesting that you say like about so is it necessity is the mother of invention. Sounds like that'll be some sort of old Greek saying somewhere along the line. It sounds very philosophical, doesn't it? So I don't know who said it though. I can't. It doesn't spring to mind. But that what's interesting about that as well is what I think the cognitive dissonance of large organizations where they forget they have a need. Sometimes like they forget. I mean, maybe like not picking on Dan's example, but it must be very easy if the money's rolling in really, really easily. It must be quite easy to forget what your purpose is, because like your purpose morphs into collecting the money that's rolling in instead of try to, like you were saying, like try to survive or getting market share from other people or doing good in the world or all those other things. You could probably like forget that really easily, couldn't you? And you just sort of feel like, well, we just know how to do it. Which sort of rolls me into another one of my favorite quotes by Mark Twain, which is it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so. And that to me speaks of learning. There's what like forgetting to learn, going, oh, I know it all now. Whereas like I think some of the best organizations somewhere have got a set of people that are just really anxious and they just doubt everything. How do we know we know this? Oh man, I'm worried. Let's get learning something.
Well, when you were talking about
sorry,
when you're talking about companies that are unmoored from a purpose, I actually read an article recently about Boeing, and there was an insider in this interview, and his claim, and I don't know if it's true or not, but this insider's claim was that what happened is they brought in people from the outside who had no experience in the airline industry. They just were executives. And so they bring in these executives, no love for airplanes. That wasn't their thing. Their thing was managing printing money. And so it eventually filtered down, and it just wasn't about building great planes. And so being unmoored from a purpose, I think certainly is a dangerous thing. In fact, Dan Pink in that video that we all watch and show people about Drive, he talks about I think he says bad things happen when your profit motive is unhinged from your purpose. So I think we've seen that any number of times throughout even recent history, right? But one thing I wanted to get back to on the failure thing is, I'm reminded of one of the executives at this giant company I worked for. He said something that's always stuck with me, and he talked about this concept of acceptable failure and unacceptable failure, right? Because I would talk about fail fast, and I think in part the language that we use as agilists or whatever we call ourselves, like I know Matt talks about limiting whip, and I've seen articles that talk about we shouldn't talk about limiting whip because we've got these cultural norms in our heads, like these ideas of the more we do, the more we get. And so there's sort of this belief that we need to do more. And so the concept of limiting WIP goes against that cultural belief. And so we should change our language to something like, I think that article said something about like, was it balanced, having balance and so if we talk about learning, I think everyone's on board with learning. If we talk about failing, I think there's I think it's intended as an incendiary, right? I think we intend it as an incendiary thing to get noticed, to say, oh, fail fast. And people go, fail fast. Well, what do you mean? I don't want to fail. And we immediately set that off in their heads when what we're really going after is learning. And so anyway, back to this executive, he says, acceptable failure, unacceptable failure. And so when we talk about failure, I think we do need to differentiate. Like I didn't screw in the door of the airplane against kind of protocols, et cetera. That might be an unacceptable failure, right? Like that's not okay. We can't not screw in the door properly because bad things happen. But we can experiment with things and we can learn, and that's okay. So acceptable failure, unacceptable failure, and what's the difference?
Yeah. That really strikes the core with me because there's two things. The first thing is I think and it's been interesting for me. I've been moved to France now a little under 10 years ago, and I the culture shock for me was obviously very much in the language, right? And the language and how the perception around certain words that are used. So failure versus learning, right? For example, so I can honestly openly say that, France is a very the relationship with risk in France is different than the relationship with risk in the US. And that's partially due to just the differing DNAs of two different countries. One which was born 400 years ago, or a little bit over 400 years ago, and one which has been over, millennia of, culture that are ingrained in certain, and so when you talk about, again, this notion of failure, oftentimes, yeah, I say learning, and I say learning is failure and failure is learning, but it just doesn't mean all across the board. So if you think of healthcare, for example, they try to create that fail fast, in a very controlled environment, right? So, it's going to be with lab rats, for example, right? I'm going to test this sort of serum or whatever it is in a very controlled environment, and learn whatever I learned from that. And if it works, and whatever learning I derive from that, I can then scale into something else in a more sort of production environment with people, or another phase of tests, which is going to help me learn more, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a notion sometimes that this fail fast or learn fast, whatever it is just all over the place. But I think it's creating the conditions around that culture that allow you to practice, fail fast in very controlled environments, and then little by little start to then affect that overall culture, through tangible wins and returns on those, specific, experiments, right? So
experimenting, yeah. I want to pick up on one of the things that you said there, because you were the first person so far to say the agile word, and I think that's quite important, because we've been speaking about like maybe traditional ways of approaching work, which might be quite deterministic and might think that it's all planned out and there's not going to be any failure in this because we've said it's going to happen in such a way, and then like different ways of working in the digital economy or a digital world and so on. And because I was thinking about that when we were talking about maybe having this topic, and I'm a big fan of behavioral economics, behavioral science, and one of the big hitters in that is Richard Thaler, who won the what's that big prize that you win? The Nobel
Prize.
He's a Nobel laureate. Thank you very much, Dan, for jumping in, reminding me about that. He wrote the book Nudge with Cass Sunstein, but he also he wrote a book about when sort of like the term behavioral economics was coined afterwards, called misbehaving. And in that, he talks about psychologists tell us that in order to learn from experience, two ingredients are necessary: frequent practice and immediate feedback loops. And that says agile to me, like agile practices. I mean, you know, lots of things say agile, like
The mindset,
yeah, someone turning quickly on a sports field or whatever says agile as much as anything else. But the agile practices that we encourage people to use, one of the reasons that I've got this enthusiasm for behavioral economics and behavioral science is that those things are the same stuff. Like we study people and how they behave, and then the outcomes and impacts that happens from these different behaviors. And it's quite interesting for me that, you know, like he says, frequent practice, immediate feedback loops. Lots of the big, like the scrums and the kanbans and the XP do those things. Practice stuff over and over again. So, you know, and then look what's happened. Look what's happened. It's also, I mean, also feeds back into the scientific method, isn't it? Like, you know, observe think about doing something, observe it, measure what's happened, and then go back round it again. And so I think, like, agile, we are agile practitioners. We are, to some people, we're agile coaches. I think that when we bring that into an organization, we're basically saying to people, here's how you learn. Like, and a lot of organizations that like maybe sort of push back against it, there's got to be some notion about the fact that actually they're basically saying to us, like, no, don't want to learn. I don't want to learn. It happens like this. Don't muck that up for us by getting us to think any differently. And that's one of the biggest risks I see when I go into places.
Well, I think that's driven by they've been successful, right? So you take this big company I've been referring to, they've been in existence for, you know, a couple hundred years. And they have been successful. So they're like, our processes work. Don't mess them up. Like, they work. Look, it's proofs in the pudding. They work. So let's not go mess that up, because we've been doing it forever and we've been successful. We print money. Now those companies are the ones that end up, you know, getting dethroned eventually, because somebody will come along and figure out a better way. But when you talk about like, one of the things that got me interested in Agile in the first place when I was in product was just reading about it. I said, my God, that makes so much sense. First is what I did at the first company I worked at, where I did development sort of, and I didn't even understand what Agile was. I didn't know what Agile was, but we did it. Looking back, that's the way we operated. And it was just natural. It was just sort of, we need to build this thing. Let's go talk to people. Let's build it. Let's do it in small parts. Let's get feedback. And for me, that goes back to, you know, I used to be a chef and work in kitchens. And for me, that immediate feedback was part of what I loved about cooking, is I could make something and I got immediate feedback. Was it good or not? And when I used to teach classes, at some retail cooking store, where I was more a glorified product salesman than I was an instructor, at least according to them. I would teach cooking, and you'd get these people and they'd come up, they'd have this recipe, and they'd be terrified, right? Like, oh my God, I have to follow this recipe. And they'd have something like wine that they're supposed to add to a dish. And so I would do this thing to lighten the mood, is I'd get people up, they'd be at the, you know, the stove would be at the front, looking at the kitchen where the instructor would be, and we'd be doing a demo, and I have someone come up, I'd say, like, okay, this calls for a cup of red wine, make sure to measure, like, it's got to be very precise. And I would have them intentionally measure over the pot. And then as soon as they got the thing to full, I would be sitting right behind them and I would nudge their elbow and more wine would go in. And I'd be like, it's totally fine. Like, it is not precise. You don't have to be, like, it doesn't matter. And also, part of the reason I'm up here teaching is not because I'm better than, like, I'm not naturally better at cooking than you, or like, it's, I've learned all the ways to mess these things up. Like, I've cooked so many times. I have screwed it up so many times. I know when things are about to go bad, and I pretty much know how to step in and solve those things because I've done it so many times. Right. So I failed that many times.
Yeah, that's like that. So that frequent practice thing, you've done it because you love doing it. You've done it so many times. And the feedback loops, you've served up the food that you've created to those people, which reminds me of a thing that that your pal Jeff Patton showed me about. Have you seen Young Frankenstein, the film?
I've seen the movie, but which part?
So where they're having a meal together, Frankenstein, and Igor, and Terry Gar. I can't remember what her character's called. But I think one of them, Igor makes the yummy noise. And it's this thing, the yummy noise, that I think, people who are looking for, so I think developers have used that quite a lot, like if they create something and they put it in the hands of the user. It's that thing about, like, one of my favorite quotes from David Ogilvy, that people don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. But so like, if you ask people for feedback, for those feedback loops, you might get something completely mad that no one actually agrees on. But if you witness them using something, or witness them tasting that thing that's got too much red wine, apparently it's according to the recipe, they make the yummy noise, it's good. That's close that feedback loop for you. You're okay. And you've learned something, you probably wouldn't get in a different context, which is that these people like that. And that's pretty good. But and this is the thing, like, I think, like, when we started off, is like, there's a risk there that they don't like too much, but it's not cost you that much. It's not been unacceptable failure to put a little bit more red wine in, and you've got that feedback loop straight away, so straight away. So if they don't make the yummy noise, you can jump in and learn that, you can constantly learn why that wasn't yummy for them, and address that, can't you? But yeah.
So for our listeners, I'm gonna make or our watchers, I'm gonna make a bingo. I think we're gonna have a T-shirt at some point of a bingo, and that David Ogilvy quote will be on there for you, as well. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I'll put my Senge quote on there. Well, like, we got to have a bingo for people to play along with, because we're going to get those quotes over and over again.
No, for sure.
Yeah, I am boring.
Yeah. So and we're going to fail fast doing it.
Yeah.
Maybe that goes on the bingo. I don't know.
Yeah. But again, I think, that notion of, if you look at, again, just looking at some of the spaces where typically you'd think that fail fast is a culture that's maybe less prevalent, thinking of healthcare, where you have obviously risks with, things that you create, manufacture, that people put into their bodies, or, tooling that's, helps, determine life and death experiences for customers. You think of, what are some other ones? Luxury, luxury is a space, obviously, that, typically you have these 100-year-old companies, or whatever how many ever old decade, that have this really unique heritage and DNA that's been something that they profit off of over time. And it's tougher to sell that story of, there's a digital native out there that's going to create a brand that's going to uproot, what you've been able to create as value, because of, there's a brand there, there's heritage, there's, I absolutely have to have this bag or this brand, because it helps me create an experience that a younger brand won't help me necessarily create. And so sometimes I think, and going back to what you said, Dan, is like that perception of it's working is often determined by just how much money and cash we're raking in. But you have other really tangible metrics, such as your turnover ratio, or, young talent really enthusiastic about coming to work for us and serving our mission and purpose over a mid to long term, right? And growing within the organization. As we know,
Jerry, I'm going to play.
Right.
I'm going to play timekeeper here on you. I'm going to keep you short, because we're at 2 minutes and 43 seconds. So if we follow our standard...
so just to outro from there. Just to outro from it, I think it's the importance of helping leadership and sponsors of trying to create these cultures or not is very deterministic on, what are some of that baseline data or metrics that we want to go from to help, tell the story of whether this thing is working or not, whether it's helping our bottom line or else helping us serve our purpose. So I'll kick it to, so we're doing last words here on this topic, and I'll kick it to you, Dan, first to,
Cool.
Maybe share some of your last bit on this.
Yeah, I think just closing up, I'd say I think that when it comes to fail fast, I certainly believe in the notion. I think that we're really talking about learning, not failure. I think it's important to think about the language that we use, and also to understand if it's something that the company values. Like there's this idea of invitation-based change, and like maybe the company, maybe it's something that we value and they don't, and maybe that just says it's not the place for us.
Nice. Should I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Matt. Yeah.
So my roundup then would be probably something along the lines of the people like us, and hopefully people who are tuning in will be going into organizations that they might feel have this notion, this worldly wisdom that it seems to be the norm, that teaches us it's better for our big business reputation to fail conventionally. So like, it's all right to fail like all the other people fail. And it's even better to fail like that than it is to succeed unconventionally, you know? And I think it's sort of our role to go in and try and relieve them of those cognitive biases, like, you know, like loss aversion and illusory truth effect and all these things where they think the truth is this boring, non-risky thing. And actually there's just risk all around. So it's like, actually engage with the risk, try and learn something, learn faster than your competitors. Don't be doing the same thing. You know, well, there's a lot of organizations we've said about that have lasted 100 years. It's just like, don't be doing the same thing in 100 years that you're doing now. That would be crazy. That would be risky. So yeah, so I think that for me, that like, let's get rid of that worldly wisdom, that norm, and try and learn unconventional.
Yeah, and so just to wrap up, I think for me, you know, it's just this is something the quote I often share with people, and it says, you know, it's shameless plug, but I came up with it on my own one morning over a shower, as we talk about the importance of showers in the morning. But yeah, I often tell people I believe the how you create value, right? And obviously that means you're pretty clear on what value is for you, but how you create value is just as, if not more important than the value you create, because that's what allows you to carry on, right? It's almost like courage. Courage is sort of like the support value for all the other values, right, that you carry, and the fact of repeating them and practicing them over and over. So I think that in that how, you know, you have a bunch of people that you bring into your organization that want to go through a collective experience to create that value. And so allowing them to be uncomfortable, allowing them to fail, allowing them to learn, allowing them to go through those range of emotions that create these brilliant products is the pinnacle. You know, that's what it's all about. And so we'll close on that, and hope to see you guys next time around.
We hope you like this episode of the Flâneurs podcast. If you did, hit that like, follow, notify, whatever button it is you need to hit, please hit it. And wherever you get your podcasts, go there and you'll find us. See you next time.